So the way we're going to do this is I'll ask each of the panelists to provide a brief introduction, what they want to talk about, and then we'll launch into more formal presentations by each of the panelists. So, sorry, excuse me here. This, so I know which order you're in. And I do regret to inform you that our first speaker, Mehdi Masumi, is unfortunately not able to make it today, but we will carry on anyway because we've got a lot of things to talk about here. So first up is Gabor Mezzi. And Gabor, why don't you tell us just a little bit about yourself and what you plan to focus on here today?
Thank you, Christine, and thanks for the invitation from the organizers. My name is Gabor Mezei. I'm a medical doctor by education and an epidemiologist, so probably that's a unique skill set in this group. Maybe I'm the only one with this. I am currently a senior managing scientist at Exponent, scientific firm, scientific and an engineering firm in Menlo Park. And previously I was at EPRI managing the EMF health assessment program. And my talk, the title of my talk is Smart Grid and Health. And I will talk about health concerns which may come up in the context of smart grid.
Okay, thank you. Matt, you're next.
So I'm Matt Lacar. I'm a principal consultant with GE Energy Consulting, part of General Electric. So, you know, when Christine mentioned that the ecosystem of the electric energy industry is changing a lot, you know, I'm proud to say GE has been part of it since the beginning. It's the company that Thomas Edison founded at the dawn of the electric age. We still have electric in the name, and I think we'll still be in it, hopefully for the rest of my career. And so we take a great interest, and I think, you know, I would sort of add on to all the great introduction that Christine gave, just to say that, you know, fundamentally what you see going on right now is an evolution of the grid paradigm, and it's an evolution that is melting down some of the silos that existed between generation, transmission, distribution, and customer end use. And if you think of it that way, you know, both the structure of the industry and the structure of the vendor ecosystem that serves that industry are rapidly changing to realize the potential of integrating across those different businesses. So what used to be, you know, very separately managed, separately instrumented and controlled businesses, each housed under what most people would refer to as electric utility, are now oftentimes in competition with each other. Customers installing generation on the customer side of the meter, competing to sell electrons into the grid, in some cases competing to serve their own needs. You have, you know, vendors like Nest thermostat, that's an intelligent end-use device, you know, that now essentially competes to take load off the grid at a cost that may be cheaper for the customer than purchasing the next unit of electricity. So, you know, it's an interesting time, it's an interesting challenge, and I look forward to telling you more about it. And my particular focus, especially in the last year or so, has been on reliability and resiliency. So which technologies can improve the reliability of electric service, and in particular, you know, since Hurricane Sandy, there's been a lot of interest in how do we harden the grid to make it, you know, a more robust system in the face of what may be accelerating rate of severe weather events and other catastrophes.
Thank you, Matt. Irfan.
Okay, so I'm Irfan Ibrahim, and I am the Director for Cyber Physical Systems Security and Resilience. It's a mouthful, at the National Renewable Energy Lab. So, you know, as a security person, the first thing I did when I landed on the Stanford campus was check out its security. And I realized it was quite lax because they let a Berkeley graduate on the ground. So you could see that I have infiltrated successfully. But my focus at NREL, as you know, is a national lab. It's a DOE lab. And what we try to do is help accelerate the adoption of technologies and reduce the commercial risk in the private sector. If there's one thing a national lab would do and do successfully, it would be that. So if you ever have seen DOE technology readiness levels, there's like a meter, and you start out with like 1 and 2, which is mostly in universities in labs or in national labs. You do basic research, and then you bring it up to about a 2, 3 level. Then you have to have some kind of testing to see how it will operate in different scenarios. And that helps bring it up to about a 5, 6 level. That's when utilities and other asset owners could do pilots and take it further up. At about 9, it becomes like the kind of thing you get at Home Depot. So I'm very involved in bringing cybersecurity technologies that have reached 2 and 3 level to 5 and 6 level in our very elaborate lab facilities in Golden, Colorado.
Thank you. So I think at this time, Gabor, if you wouldn't mind
Sure.
standing up here and going through your slides, we'll get more drill down into your topic.
Yeah, I know the feeling, yes. So usually we talk about potential health effects. I mean, this comes like an afterthought almost, so we kind of got into right at the beginning of this conference, so it's kind of turn it upside down, because first we talk about the technology and then some engineers comes by, oh, so do we have any problem with potential health effects? So now we talk about it first. But when we talk about the smart grid potential health effects related to smart grid, so we have to put it in context. So it's not just developed because of the smart grid. So that has been around even since, I mean, the last 40 years, basically. Potential health concerns with respect to EMF has been around for about the mid to late 70s. In 1979 came the first now famous study from Denver, Colorado, actually an epidemiology study that showed an effect, an association, not an effect, an association with childhood cancers. And that basically created a whole field of, whole research field, epidemiology studies, animal studies, exposure assessment, in vitro cell studies. And then you can name any disease that was studied with respect to EMF. So that's the old grid, if you like, potential health concerns. Both residential, occupational exposures were looked at, and the news is good overall, so there was no confirmed health effects with respect to EMF. But so why is this still carrying on? So there is some remaining uncertainty in this area. So there is some statistical association in some studies, and that. So I mean, in science, you can never really prove the negative, the absence of an effect. So there is always some residual uncertainty, and then the more research you do, that uncertainty hopefully will be reduced, but it would never be completely gone. And then based on that statistical association, the International Agency for Research on Cancer and the World Health Organization classified 60 Hertz magnetic field as a possibly carcinogenic to human exposure, which sounds quite alarming if you don't know what it really means, but basically it's all good news, because that's the lowest possible category it could be put if there is any scientific evidence. So if it was anything higher, that would be probably reason for concern, but this is the lowest possible category where there is some association. And of course we have the media attention and the environmental activists, of course, and the media attention goes back very far. So if you watch the movie American Hustle, the character played by Jennifer Lawrence mentioned the microwave oven, and it cooks your food or zaps your food or whatever, so then it took the nutrients out of it. And there is an actual lawsuit about that right now going on, about that quote. And then all this was triggered by the infrastructure development. The more, I mean, Christine mentioned that Edison would recognize the all transmission lines, maybe some of them. And so these are all, needs to be upgraded, needs to be rebuilt, basically, because they're just old. And then all these new renewables has to be brought into the grid. And then, of course, the risk perception, the ever-present, usually biased human risk perception. It's not always proportional to the actual risk what you are facing. And so, I mean, some of these drivers are carry over to the smart grid as well, some of these old concerns. So right now we are undergoing a rapid infrastructure development. So you see new technologies coming in to this area, and then the media is focusing on it as well, potential health effects. And the ever-present activists are always there, and then some of them are legitimately concerned about the environment, but some may not that the driver may not be the actual owner's concern. And then, again, the risk perception. And then it has been shown repeatedly that the biggest determinant how we perceive risk is whether we voluntarily choose to expose ourselves or choose to do some activity, or it's imposed upon us. If it's voluntary, then obviously the risk perception is going down, so we take a calculated risk. But if it's imposed upon us, even the smallest risk can be magnified tremendously, even if they tell you that, oh, it's only 1 in a million. So you are telling me that I have a chance to get this, right? So even if it's 1 in a million. So, and then we have new and rapidly changing technologies with all these potential exposure scenarios. So what are these exposure scenarios? I mean, Christine narrowed it down to the communication mostly, but I think if we talk about the broader concept of the new grid, we talk about the renewable generation facilities, wind, solar, all the electric transportation, storage devices, and wireless charging, and then of course wireless communication, which is the center of this smart grid. And then for some of these exposure, we have tremendous scientific knowledge already available, but not all of them. So we have some of these new technologies, new exposure scenarios we just have less scientific knowledge available about that. And then we talk about the smart grid. We almost exclusively talk about the concerns about smart meters at this point. And because it was widely deployed in many states, and that was funded by the stimulus package by President Obama, like $4 billion went to just the development of the electricity grid, and then many of that money went to deploying smart meters. In California, I think it's almost 100% complete, and in many states as well. And this is the most visible part of the smart grid, what the customer, just the average customer sees. They put it on your house, right? And it looks very intrusive. Somebody comes to your property and they put it on your wall, so and then you don't have no say in it. Actually, that's not true, because there are opt-out options in most of the states right now. But then, nevertheless, this resulted in public opposition in many states and localities. Just in California, in the Northern California area, there was about 24 municipalities which wanted to put moratorium on smart meter deployment because of potential health concerns. And then, and then there were more than 2,000 actual filed complaints filed to California Public Utility Commission about potential health effects. And then we have this radio communication issue with the cell phones that's kind of migrated over to this technology, and then the traditional old EMF concerns also migrated. Although we talk about very different frequencies, in the public mind, it's not always easy to separate. So what do we know about potential health effects of radio frequency exposure? The news is, again, overall it's good. The preponderance of the evidence does not suggest that there is any health effect. There is some residual uncertainty, and most of the studies were focusing on cell phone use. Most of this Interphone study, which was a 13-study international case control epidemiology study, overall they did not see an increase in brain cancer risk with cell phone use, but there is some residual uncertainty again among those who used 15, 20 years the cell phone, but the data there gets very sparse because there are it wasn't that prevalent 20 years ago. But if you look at, again, the national trends, in many countries did that analysis, if there is no increase in brain cancer risk overall, so that's good news. If it was really a potent carcinogen, then we would definitely see some increase in brain cancer risk. What do we know about smart meter emissions? It's a very low power antenna. Mostly it's 1 watt or less, a quarter watt antenna on some of these communication systems. It has a very low duty cycle, which means that it transmits signal very infrequently and for very short duration of time. And then we know that exposure is very quickly decreasing by distance, and it's usually you don't put it next to your head as you do with your cell phone, but it's somewhere out in the wall of your building. So the exposure is very minimal. Several of these reviews has been conducted. For example, the California Council of Science and Technology completed its review in 2011, and they did not find any clear indication of adverse health effects. And then also in Texas, the PUC conducted a review, and then there were other bodies. And the emissions are well below currently current safety limits, and there is no clear indication of health. And they're just closing, so usually, again, as I said, health effects come just after the fact. You know, this is almost like an afterthought, but then we have to pay attention at early on, and we have to get the facts right. So if you don't want it to derail your project or your product, then you have to pay attention to it. You have to know the engineering details, the technical details of it. You have to know the relevant health research as well, and then you have to know the relevant regulations as well. And then you have to take it seriously, because health and safety is a very emotionally charged issue. So you may lose your audience fairly quickly if you don't take them seriously. And then, as I said, pay attention early, and then you have to be consistent delivering the same message. And communication, I think, is very important in this area. I think this is, my time is up, and then I am open to a couple of questions, or?
You have about 5 minutes, so if there are any questions.
Okay, so any questions, or? Yes?
Bert Van from Infinival. Knowing that we share the same continent back there, and Europe has a whole different approach, is there any collaboration between it, since particularly the health concerns in Europe are already heightened more than in the US? Can you touch on the collaboration efforts?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, there are several international collaborations, like this Interphone study I was talking about. That was an international study. Canada was part of it, US was not. But if we could talk about the smart grid specifically, in Europe they have smart meters as well, but for example in Italy I think they use communication over power lines, so they don't use wireless technologies. So then the concern basically goes away in terms of RF exposure. There are other countries, I think, for example the UK, I don't know if they have they already deployed it, started to deploy it, but I think they may lean toward wireless transmission as well. So then it might come up, although I think the UK utility is handling it very well.
Thanks.
And then most of the health studies actually are going on in Europe. It's funded by the EU. Some of them were funded by the 7th framework of research proposal for research funding for environmental health issues, and that part of that there were several epidemiology studies conducted but it's mostly focusing on cell phone use and brain cancer. So that's the main focus of the of these studies. And then some of these, I did like these acronyms like LexNet, Arimora, Geronimo. So these are large studies, multi-million-dollar studies, focusing on epidemiology and also some exposure assessment. So they really want to do exposure assessment because we have many sources, not just the smart meters, not just our cell phones, but we are surrounded by wireless sources and other sources of potential exposure to RF or whatever form of intermediate frequencies, extremely low frequencies. So LexNet, for example, is trying to map up the overall exposure of to the population. Yes, one question?
One of your slides you touched on electric vehicles and wireless charging. Could you expand on what the concerns are there?
Well, it's the same concern with what we have with EMF exposure. So some of these wireless charging facilities, you have very high field levels. So it's much higher than just standing next to a power line. I think some of the engineers may elaborate on more, but then it's actually the high levels of electrical magnetic fields that's the potential concern. So basically the same concern about EMF effects.
Taking out the wireless charging for a second, are there also concerns about electric vehicles themselves producing fields that could be?
Correct. Yes, I mean, basically the idea was that electric transportation runs on electricity, so there may be potentially more fields, higher exposure to electric fields. But actually, when I was at EPRI, we did a measurement program. We compared electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles, and gasoline vehicles, and even gasoline vehicles have EMF in them. From several sources. So the exposure is actually not that different in an electric vehicle compared to the traditional gasoline vehicle. So there is somewhat higher EMF exposure in the electric vehicles, but it's very close. It's not like magnitudes higher. It's just a small difference.
Yeah, I have actually one more question.
Sure,
I'm sorry.
go ahead.
But if you take alternating current out of the equation, doesn't EMF completely go away as a health concern? And does that lead us to perhaps thinking more about returning to the days of DC or partially direct current?
Well, I mean, DC is a whole different animal, obviously, and so that's, but I'm not sure AC would go away anytime soon. So that's here to stay. And then there are various frequencies. DC is probably, I mean, we are, I mean, just here, standing here, we are exposed to DC magnetic fields by the Earth, geomagnetic fields. So that's a different exposure. But we also have radio frequencies and intermediate frequencies. So the whole range of electromagnetic spectrum we are exposed to. Okay, one more question. Yes.
How does a smart meter transmit the signal? Is it through a cell phone tower or?
Well, it's, I mean, I don't know who else wants to talk about it, some engineers, but then basically it's a mesh network, so it's basically a little antenna on each smart meter has an antenna in it. Actually, there may be more than one antennas in it. So one is the local area network, which communicate with each other as a mesh network, and then there is typically one collector meter which transmit the information through cellular signal to the center. So if anyone else wants to answer that.
Yeah. So on the wireless side, there are two architectures. One is a tower-based and one is mesh-based. So the tower-based has enough range that each meter can speak to the tower directly. One hop and you're on the main highway back to the enterprise. In a mesh, you announce, each meter announces where it is, and people realize who their neighbors are. And they move the packet with the best effort to get to the access point. So sometimes it can be 2 hops, sometimes it can be 6 hops. And since the way data is collected is just really once a day to report, they don't worry about its immediate access. So that's why the mesh works. But I call it internet welfare. It's best effort.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, so next up we'll have Matt speak. Thank you so much, Gabor.
So while you're getting my slides out, are we using the mic? I don't know. I'll just give my disclaimer that I'm speaking here. Although I've got the GE logo on my slides, any remarks I make are attributable to me. Don't blame GE. Although I've got some GE slides in there too. You can go straight to my first slide, actually.
And we have to use our imagination.
Yes, it's imagination at work. I'm imagining my slide in front of me right now. Here we go. So I've wanted to use this slide for a while. I was in Europe a few weeks ago on family vacation, and for those who don't know, this is the Rialto Bridge in Venice. And it occurred to me as we think about investing in a new century of infrastructure for the electric grid, that it pays to look at what good infrastructure looks like. So, you know, in the middle of the 12th century, Venice was the commercial hub of the world. It was the Wall Street flash trading desk of its day. You know, news of the silk harvest in China came up the Silk Road. You know, merchants from all across the Orient brought their spices and silks to trade for wool and metals from Northern Europe. And here on this bridge was the world's first open market. And it's a physical infrastructure, right? So it's got this nice kind of metaphorical attachment. There's also, so one of the properties that you see is it's kind of open looking, right? And it connects these private palazzi, the palaces of the rich, where all of the wealth had previously been accumulated in an old feudal system, but it was this public space, right? And that's a metaphor for me for open architecture, that, you know, good infrastructure promotes the free exchange of goods and services, right? It's transparent, it's a market infrastructure. I also mentioned it's at the hub of this large communication network that reaches, at the time, across the known world. I mean, Marco Polo was a Venetian who actually was, you know, we think the first Westerner to write about Japan. So think about that, you know, in an age of horse-drawn carts, somebody had been, you know, halfway around the world. And then there's this question of, you know, verify but trust, as Reagan said. Venice was also the home of, or the invention, the point of invention of double entry bookkeeping. The banca, which is the first commercial banks, were the benches inside the Rialto Bridge and in the adjacent entrepot around. So, you know, think about that too, that when you have a infrastructure for commercial activity, right, that promotes free trade in goods, just like the electric grid promotes free exchange of electrons in our new paradigm, you have to not only facilitate transactions, you have to track them and audit them and be sure that what I'm paying for I'm really getting. And one of the problems we have in electricity that makes it a little more challenging than telecom, I would say, is our product moves at the speed of light and it follows a path of least resistance. So unlike a switched telecom network where you can track every phone call from its point of origin to its point of termination, electric transactions freely flow through an open sluice, right? And we impute afterwards, we line up the economic transactions with the physical flow of electrons, but the electrons follow the laws of physics, and they don't always go where we would, you know, theoretically want them to go on a commercial basis. So you need these mechanisms to audit transactions, enforce bargains, particularly when you think about enabling customers to choose between grid service and generating their own. The costs of either rare events where the local generation fails and the customer falls back on the grid, or of bankruptcy or default in a transaction where the customer reverts to default utility service. Do we want to live in a world where that doesn't happen? Probably not. We probably want to ensure, at least for the time being, that the grid remains the sort of ubiquitously available, high reliability, safe backup system, even for those customers who roll their own. Okay? And the last point I wanted to make is, you know, when you're building infrastructure, and you know, the reason infrastructure is maybe a little different from, you know, plug and play digital technology, you know, the latest cell phone gadgets that we're going to throw away and landfill in a couple of years, is that infrastructure really lasts a long time. I mean, Venice hasn't been the capital of world commerce for 800 years. And you can visit the Rialto Bridge today. In fact, I love that there's this crane in the background, which is sort of the, you know, contrast of the modern infrastructure being built in the background. But you know, it's beautiful, right? They invested the effort in making this new institution that dominated world commerce. I mean, obviously, it created a lot of wealth, and the people were proud of it, and they wanted to showcase it. I think that's a sensibility that maybe we've lost a little bit. But if you think of sort of the epics of world commerce, you know, the Eiffel Tower at the dawn of the industrial age was a tremendous symbol for people. I mean, at first they thought it was garish and ugly and hideous, and they realized, you know, as they moved into the mechanical age, that there was beauty in steel structures, right? So we need to think a little bit about, you know, as we think about what is this smart grid thing, what is it going to look like, well, how's it going to change our lives? Let's try and make it look nice. So when I need nice looking slides, I always go back to my corporate graphic designers. So pardon the plug, just to let you know who GE is. We are a giant conglomerate in many different industrial fields. We're actually in the process of selling off the capital business, as you may have heard, spinning it out, excuse me. So, you know, refocusing, recentering on our roots as an industrial company, of which energy is a big, big piece. So we have 3 major energy businesses. I belong to the energy management, which is everything that we sell to the energy industry, to the electric energy industry. We also have an oil and gas equipment business that sells to the exploration and production industry. And then we sell large turbine equipment for power generation and water sanitation, etc. And the reason I went back to these sort of corporate slides here is just to share with you that, as I mentioned, this transition that's taking place in the energy industry, I mean, I think smart grid is a great term, and it helps people wrap their heads around what's going on. But think of it also, you know, in terms of the smart part is digital intelligence getting into everything, right? So that we can extract data from everything and make more intelligent decisions. And to me, that's smart. You know, nobody's in favor of a dumb grid. The challenge is that there's a lot of investment that has to go into making all of these machines talk to each other and making sense of the mountains of data that come out of them. I remember reading that we have a generator test facility in Greenville, South Carolina, that's heavily instrumented. You know, it's a giant generator with every little valve and part and blade on the turbine has a sensor on it, and we extract from that device, from that test facility, more data every day than the entire Library of Congress. Every book that's ever been written by an author in human history. I mean, that's shocking, the amount of data that is being generated these days. Right? We don't, you know, use but a tiny fraction of a % of it, but the potential is there to make absolutely, you know, more efficient, more optimal decisions, forestall, you know, major infrastructure investment until it's necessary, and ensure the reliability of our grids so that customers never experience an outage. So I'll breeze through just to give you a sense of the breadth of the GE portfolio, but we're in generation, transmission, and distribution. And the reason I like these slides is it's actually very hard to visualize what a smart grid is. I struggled for a long time to come up with good pictures, so I like the Rialto Bridge picture to start with. So Christine mentioned a number of these drivers behind the transition or the evolution of a smart grid. Life is very hard for your electric utility right now. And I say this as somebody who consults to the global electric utility industry. I talk to utility executives all the time, and I hear the same kinds of concerns and uncertainty. The move to renew, it's not that utilities necessarily resist the policy objectives for increased use of renewables, for environmental reasons, but the change from a fuel-driven thermal combustion power plant that is fully dispatchable, I flip a switch and I know what I'm going to get, to a renewable resource that produces great electricity when the wind blows or the sun shines, but I have to get into the meteorology business to figure out when that's going to be. And in the aggregate over a portfolio, I can make a good forecast of when during the year and during the day those resources are available, but it's not under my direct control. And that loss of control is a real sort of fear factor element for utility planning folks. The proliferation of resources that aren't even owned and operated by the utility itself, but sit behind the meter on a customer premise, or perhaps have a non-utility operator like a community generator, also creates a challenge from a management standpoint. I can plan my resources on the grid, and in fact we go through a very complicated regulatory process to figure out what central power plants to build. But if my customers are all deploying solar generation and obviating the need for a power plant, you know, I may not see it until I've already built the plant and it's too late. And now I have to recover my investment some other way. And then you have, you know, automation, new communications technology, all of the good stuff that consumers are excited by, that makes our job easier, but also exposes us to new kinds of risks. And you'll hear about some of the cybersecurity concerns, I think, from Irfan. But those are real, right? And we don't want to complicate our lives and sort of give ourselves a black eye with one, you know, bad mistake. So, and then the problem that I focus on is really around this reliability question. How do we maintain, you know, the grid, I think, was voted by the National Academy of Engineering as the greatest engineering marvel of the 20th century. It is basically a giant global electromechanical machine, a single interconnected network. It's not really one single interconnected network. We have 3 in the US, but nevertheless it has very, very high reliability, much higher than any of the other networked systems, right? And you think about how often your cable network goes out, your phone network goes out. It's actually relatively rare that you see a wide-scale power outage. When you do, it's usually in the middle of a thunderstorm, and you understand why. So I'm not going to go through all the details here, but when we talk about reliability, refers to the availability of the system under normal operating conditions, including normal bad weather, right? Lots of things cause outages on even blue sky days. You know, we have animals that scurry across the lines and cross the insulators and fry themselves. We have trees that fall down. We have equipment that fails. And you know, we have errors by utility crewmen. So all of those things can be mitigated to some extent with the addition of new technology. We have digital switching now that can detect and in some cases restore service before anybody even notices that power is out. We can also remotely reconfigure service to restore service from another direction. And then you have weather events where you still probably, in most cases, you have downed equipment and you have to roll a truck, but the automation can help you restore service to those customers who are unaffected quicker and overall improve reliability. And in fact, there's very good evidence from the stimulus pilot programs that there's about a 20 to 40% headroom of available reliability improvement under normal operating circumstances. So that's good news, right? And that's proven smart grid stuff that we can all invest in and get behind. Major storm events are different. So something like a Hurricane Sandy, or in California we worry about a major earthquake. Those events take down large portions of the system at once. The resources become very constrained. You don't have enough crews to go out. You have to borrow crews, typically from neighboring utilities. The automation is not allowed to run for very important safety reasons, because in the middle of a storm, you don't have communications access to all of the equipment. You don't have, you may have crews that are actively climbing poles and they're up there in harsh conditions. They don't have time to check the system to make sure they're not crossing the wires. So the good news is the automation helps you immediately after the storm has subsided and the damage has been assessed to restore service in the same way it does in a normal day. And it's extremely valuable under these conditions because, if you remember Hurricane Sandy, you had millions of consumers without power for days, weeks in some cases. If you can reduce that from days to hours, it makes a huge difference in people's lives. Food doesn't spoil, their houses stay warm or cool if it's a summer event. So there's real value in these technologies. How do we measure that value to make a business case for investment? And that's kind of the challenge I'll end with, because that's where I spend most of my time right now. The challenge being that there are a lot of complicating, confusing factors. Reliability varies from year to year. It varies from utility to utility for reasons that are not always intuitively obvious. You have underground systems that are much more resistant to weather impacts, but when you have a flooding event, as you did during Sandy, they're even more exposed, and it's much harder and more expensive to get into underground systems to repair them. So it's not evident that those are the best investments to make. When we did the stimulus pilots, we did them on circuits that were known problem circuits or that were highly political, in urban load centers. We didn't try out pilots on every different kind of circuit. So we don't really know from the stimulus results that the technology works the same everywhere. And then there are these combination effects. If you have automated meter reading or advanced metering infrastructure, as we do now in California, you can detect the outage very quickly. And if you feed that information back to the outage management system, the utility is able to respond quicker and do a better job. You have to invest more to take those now very powerful data systems and integrate them together. So I guess my parting message is that, and then there's this whole emerging area of microgrids, which maybe we'll get into in the discussion. I won't dwell on that here, but that's the idea of a group of customers maybe similarly located, collectively pooling to share generation resources so that they can island themselves from the grid, and when the grid is out, serve their own needs. It's very attractive for critical infrastructure facilities like police and fire and hospitals and prisons that really need 100% reliable power. So I guess the last thought I wanted to leave you with is there's a lot of interesting needs in this area, and for those of you who are technology developers or researchers, we need your help. This is not an area that's gotten a lot of attention historically. I think it's kind of where the smart grid has moved. The stimulus was politically driven, so we had to dole out money to every state and every congressional district. But now we're in an era of show me, right? Show me the business case. Regulators will not let utilities invest billions of dollars in technology without this kind of business case. So that's my message.
Thank you, Matt. Let's take two questions. Yeah, we've got time for that right now, and then we'll launch into Irfan's presentation.
Yeah, well, thank you for that great overview. With such a critical and highly expensive infrastructure challenge, where do you even see a small, tiny little startup playing in there? Because utility is not going to look at us.
Right.
And, oh, by the way, we need to raise $100 million. Well, that's not going to happen.
Right.
How do you see that evolving?
This is near and dear to my heart. So I was in venture capital for about 8 years, trying to figure this puzzle out, how to get new technology into the energy space. And basically what I figured out was the GEs of the world are the channel partner that you need. So if you're a startup with good technology, what you need is somebody who is known and trusted by the utility industry that's willing to work with you, right, and willing to integrate your chip or your technology into a product or a solution, because utilities don't buy and test new technology. They don't. And the guys who are at EPRI can tell you, I think Dan Rassler, I think, has this historic data on how long it's taken for each of the technologies that are now accepted in the utility industry to get there. And it's like 30 years typically. That's not a viable startup cycle for any investor. So the good news is, the big guys like GE want and are looking for good new technology, and we've become, and one of the things that attracted me to GE is that we've become, in the last 10 years, one of the biggest venture players in the space, if not the biggest, because we see the need across the industry to adapt new technology.
So when I hear your presentation, the one thing I thought was left out, and maybe you'll comment on, is stationary energy storage, both at the grid level, distribution level, and local level, and how does that play into the effect of disaster recovery and all the other things you talked about?
So it's interesting. I mean, storage today is an expensive proposition. So that is battery electric storage. There are lots of other ways to store useful energy. And what I tend to encourage people to think about is the thermal side of things. It's much cheaper actually to store locally if you have a need for thermal energy, right? To store boiling or freezing water, for example, as you do on the Stanford campus, in fact, than it is to generate electricity, which is this wonderful marvel of engineering, right, that moves at the speed of light and does all kinds of things like light up laptops that's very hard to do with combustion, but at the penalty that its losses become very important when you try to store over long periods of time. So battery storage today is expensive, and there are a lot of people working on improving the cost profile. Certainly lithium-ion batteries that are in all our portable devices have scaled up, and Tesla really proved, and hats off to Elon Musk, that you can power a car on 8,000 laptop batteries, and now you've got people trying to power substation level, megawatts, megawatt hours of storage with lithium-ion. But there are a lot of other competing technologies at that scale. So remains to be seen. I guess I'll leave it there. We'll probably touch on it with the panel. But
yeah.
Thank you. So next up, Irfan. Thanks again, Matt.
No slides. All right. Good afternoon. So my presentation is encrypted. And if anyone can decrypt it and see what I put, let me know. The purpose of my presentation today is to help you, all of you, no matter what your roles are, whether you're students or you're faculty or you're doing research or you just have an interest in the subject of cybersecurity, and you're interested in doing something in the energy sector that's meaningful, my purpose is to guide you a little bit. Silicon Valley, I've lived here 30 years. I did my PhD at Cal, worked at Livermore, went through all the revolutions that came, network management, fiber optics, nuclear fusion. I did it all. So after 4 or 5 hype cycles, I'm a veteran now. And very few things actually impress me. So I go to the root of the problem and try to figure out what's the issue. And this is one of the main reasons why I've joined the National Lab, because they give me the time to reflect and not just always react to valuations and sales and things like that. So I'm going to say something very provocative to you right now for Silicon Valley. For the energy sector, securing the energy sector at the moment doesn't require new technology. Now that's scary. So all these companies that are sitting saying, I'm going to build the next tool, that's not where the excitement is. So think of it like this. If somebody asks you to make a dish, you can go and buy ingredients from a store, or you can start from scratch and build every ingredient. And I'm telling you, the ingredients to make the dish are available in the store. So what does that mean? That means that it's time for systemic thinking of cybersecurity rather than component-based security. It's about how to put things together to give you the situational awareness that you need in the fast world that's getting faster and faster and deeper in complexity in the number of devices. And if you get into the Internet of Things, even more things coming. So the issue is not that we need a new encryption engine. The issue is not that we need a new firewall. The issue is not that we need a new intrusion detection system. No. Yeah, maybe some VC or angel investor will throw some money in your direction and you can have a nice exit and a company like GE may buy you. Fine. But not much is going to come out of it in terms of impact. The impact today is in recipes of how you put things together to address the issue of cybersecurity. And that's why I don't have slides, because what would I say? Don't do it, don't do it? No. My job today is to help you get a multiplier on your effort. So your performance, you hit that linear portion of the S-curve. Because you're the brains here in Silicon Valley. And if I don't do this, I'm not doing you a service. I can tell you the opportunity is so many $1 billion and go forth and multiply like Noah did to all the animals after the flood. I'm not going to do any such thing. I'm going to ask you to be a little conservative and be strategic in your thinking. So, the first thing is that there are some best practices in cybersecurity that you have to practice. Otherwise, don't go looking for that innovative solution to solve. What does that mean? You have networks. Networks are connected to each other. So you should have proper segmentation of your networks in your infrastructure. This segmentation should be based on need. You know, you have all this information, but everyone doesn't need all the information. So you segment the network. You put the appropriate firewalls between the segments so that every time data is trying to move from one segment to another, it's policed. Like, why are you going there? What's your purpose in the destination? The old model was the Cold War model, where we had big walls around our enterprises. And basically, the bad guys were outside, and all the trusted good guys were inside. That's how, you know, NSFNet and DARPANet got together and formed the original internet. That was the concept, that all the security was on the outside. Gone are those days. There is a bigger threat from inside this country than there is from outside this country. And the threat from inside the country is not from someone with an accent sitting on a keyboard and trying to challenge our United States. No, they're industrial espionage rings. And there are people who have 2 W-2 forms. one for the legitimate job that they're in, and the other one with the industrial espionage ring. And their job is just to collect data. They're not going to attack, but they just collect information all day long, and they figure out patterns so that at a time of their choosing, they can monetize this information, give it to the person who actually wants to attack. So what is the result? The result is that if the threat is as much inside as it's outside, situational awareness is the way to solve the cybersecurity problem, not building new higher walls. So if you have AES 256, you're hitting the law of diminishing returns on encryption. But you can't put AES 256 on everything, because we have a mix of legacy equipment and modern equipment. The legacy equipment doesn't have the memory or processing capability or the networking capability to handle that kind of thing. So ask yourself, do I really need to encrypt the transformer temperature or its viscosity? Not really. But if I was sending maybe some encryption keys, I may put it in a hash and send it, because I don't want clear text for those keys, because then people can freely decrypt anything. So be strategic in your thinking on how you solve the problem. Another thing, role-based access control. This concept is very, very important. That based on your job, you're allowed certain things and not allowed certain things. And that's a very simple concept, and there have been tools available for the last 15 years I can document. There used to be a company called Interactive One I used to deal with, where you, on the fly, you could set privileges for individuals based on a single sign-on. Now, IT and OT are coming together in very interesting ways. And distributed energy resources, by the way, is forcing IT and OT to come together, whether they like it or not. So long gone are the days of air gaps and logical gaps between the information technology and the operational technology side. So therefore, there has to be a proper gateway between the two that says, why is this traffic moving this way when there's no purpose for it? Stop it, alert the firewall, break the session. You know, best practices like that. Another thing that is very, very important is the concept of risk. You know, security is a lot like fishing and farming. You can throw all the money you want on bait, on fishing rods, and boats, and still not catch any fish. You can do the same with farming. You can get all the fertilizer, the land, and everything, but if you're not with the cycle of nature and the salt level of the soil and all of these things, you may not grow any crops. Cybersecurity is the same way. You can throw billions at it and not be secure. The key thing is to have a proper concept of risk, and you assess risk not anecdotally, not subjectively, but empirically, by using the proper vulnerability and penetration testing on simulations of what it is that you're going to deploy. Until you don't do that, it's all conjecture. And until you don't know the risk associated, you don't know how much money to invest. Because the product of the probability of something happening and the price of the outcome of that bad thing, that product is what decides how much you want to invest in cybersecurity. So it's not one shoe fits all. You know how in IT they tell you, oh, we were on 4.0 NT, let's all move to 5.0, or let's all move to Windows 8. You can't do that in operation technology. Matt will tell you, coming from GE, that forklift upgrades is a luxury limited to the IT side of the organization. So what you have to do is figure out what your strategic areas are. Put the appropriate amount of investment to protect those critical assets whose unfavorable outcome you cannot pay the price of, and invest in cybersecurity as a preventative thing to make sure that it stays functioning. So I'm going to conclude by what I would call metanoia, which in Greek means the shifting of mind. So what is the metanoia I'm going to leave you with? That when you think of cybersecurity, don't think of this nerdy, geeky concept that there's someone who knows the Diffie-Hellman equation and knows how to, you know, move bits around. No, that's just one aspect of it. Really, cybersecurity and resilience, when you put them together, are all about business continuity. Remember, technology doesn't generate wealth. Applications do. Business applications generate wealth. They're the ones that keep people employed. They're the ones that produce things. If you look in a factory, it's always those applications that produce product. All of this other stuff is just enabling stuff. So keeping the continuity of application is your final arbiter. Just like in information technology, they tell you the end user experience is the final arbiter. It's not what the application developer says or the database guy says. It's what the guy sitting at the laptop says who's connected to the application, that Citrix is not working or Remedy is not working. That's the final arbiter. So in cybersecurity, it's the availability of those applications. For energy, this is critical. In financial services, confidentiality is very important, right? Or in healthcare, for instance, confidentiality is very important because they're patient records and things like that. But in energy, availability is numero uno. Integrity of the data is the second priority because fuzzing of the data can cause the infrastructure to get going in the wrong direction. And then confidentiality selectively for the things where if it became public knowledge could cause disruption. So do you see how I took the CIA, confidentiality, integrity, availability model and turned it upside down for the energy? Until you don't do that, you're not going to get utilities' attention. You're not going to get independent power producers' attention for whatever it is that you're providing. So what I'd like to leave you with is, if you are interested in cybersecurity, start thinking in a systemic manner, start thinking in terms of business continuity, and offer solutions that shows that you understand the ecosystem in which you're providing. This is not the time to bring your wares out like Matt was showing in Venice. You know, come and buy your frankincense and musk, and it's not like that. It has to be integrated solutions. So let's see how good your memory is. How many openings were there in the bridge that Matt showed in Venice? Does anyone remember? 7?
7, 9.
There were 13. There were 6 on one side, 6 on the other, and then the one in the middle. So I thought if there were 2 applications or end systems that were talking, on the OSI reference model, there would be 7 layers. Right? And there was an opening in each layer, which means that there was a security vulnerability. So the bridge that he showed, for me, you know, it's all about mental models. I saw that.
Transparency and communication.
Exactly.
Openness.
But also, the flip side of the openness and transparency is vulnerabilities. And we need to address them in each of the logical layers to say we have a truly integrated system. The answer is systemic thinking, putting it together, and not coming up with the next bell or whistle. Thank you.
Thanks, Erica. While we get the panelists up, let's take one question from the audience, and then we'll jump into that and have more opportunity for more questions from the audience. Does anyone have a question for Irfan?
Yeah, and how much trouble are we?
So for that, I have a couplet from Rumi, the Persian poet. And the couplet goes something like this, that beyond the notions of right and wrong, there is a field. I'll meet you there. Our issue is that we have been obsessed with notions of right and wrong, which is compliance, and not been working in the field out there, which is security and reliability. But I feel that we have reached that point in the energy sector where people are realizing that if you focus on security and reliability, compliance is built into it, and not to look at it the other way. So we're not in a lot of trouble from a cybersecurity perspective. We are in a lot of trouble from a business process perspective, from the way we run things.
Well, actually, I was at a cybersecurity conference in Dallas, and there were numerous quite concerning breaches in water supply tower breakage. I mean, Stuxnet is probably the most publicized one, which is like, okay, why would you use Windows in a security application? But there's other ones, I mean, Hoover Dam, critical arteries that are very delicate, and I mean, it's concerning.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is distill the problem down to its root. The root is mismanagement, lack of coordination between groups. No, one group using the most advanced technology, the other one doesn't even have wind of it. That's the problem. It's not a technology problem. It's a human problem of awareness. Okay.
Yep.
Now I'm taking from the shared time. So.
So we have about 15 minutes for Q&A, and to borrow on a metaphor earlier about cooking, we've cooked up our own questions here, but we also want to get some of your questions out there as well. So I'm going to direct a question to each of the panelists, and everyone can chime in. I better make the right list here, though. Starting with you, Gabor, I'd like you to talk a little bit about what's some of the ongoing research that's happening out there right now.
Right. So most of the radio frequency related research is focusing on brain cancer and its potential relation to cell phone use. So that's where most of the people get the highest exposure using their cell phone on a daily basis. And a large number of epidemiologic studies have been conducted, but some are still ongoing. There is one, it's called, they really like these acronyms. One is the COSMOS study. It's a multinational study. I think 6 countries is participating. It's a cohort of 300,000 cell phone users in Europe in 6 countries, and then they plan to follow them for a very long time. So that's one. And then, as I said, the 7th framework in the European Union for research is funding several studies, mostly focusing on epidemiology and an exposure assessment, describing the exposure experience of the population, not just focusing on cell phones, and definitely not only on smart meters, but all the wireless technologies and all the exposure sources we have. And then I want to mention one US study. It's a very large study conducted by the National Toxicology Program, and that's a large, I don't know exactly how many, but probably hundreds of mice and rats are exposed to radio frequency exposure at 900 megahertz and then the 1900 megahertz. The 2 frequencies are most commonly used for telecommunication, and then they are exposing them throughout their lifetime, and then I think it's in progress right now. It's coming to an end, and so that would be very influential. If there is no sign of carcinogenicity, then I think that would be a very strong argument that there is probably no carcinogenic effect. So mostly Europe, but there is one large animal study in the US.
And kind of tying together a couple different themes here, I think we'd all agree that changing technology is easy, changing people is hard. And when we see people who are opposed to smart meters, or Maine you had listed as one of your states, I distinctly remember reading about someone who claimed that the smart meter that was installed gave their dog cancer. And now we see similarities with this whole vaccination debate going on. How, and this is a question for all of you, what are the most effective approaches to educating people that this change is a good change? Status quo not so good. So
I'll take a crack at that one. So, because I was very concerned when PG&E went through this kind of hype cycle around the potential effects of EMF from smart meters. So one of the programs that's been very effective is Oklahoma Gas and Electric, which also rolled out a number of smart meters to its customers. And what they did that was smart, that was right, was they called each customer within 10 days of the meter being installed, before they even had gotten a bill on the new meter. And they explained to them all the benefits and offered to put them on new tariffs, new time of use rate structures. But even for those customers who chose not to take any of the new options, they had an understanding of what this thing was on the side of their house, why it was there, and why ultimately it might be beneficial for them. And they found in post-event surveys that people felt very differently about the technology. They were much more supportive. And I think it goes to this point you made about control, right? Why are people so concerned about airline accidents or now train accidents, but not about getting behind the wheel of their car? Well, when you're behind the wheel of the car, you have this, unfortunately, false sense of security that you're driving the big multi-ton metal cage, but you're in control. And if you do your job, maybe you'll be okay. And I think people don't like being in that situation where the technology is imposed upon them, and somebody shows up during the day when they're not home and sticks a new thing on the side of the house, and that gets into all kinds of conspiracy theories for people. So. Communicating proactively during, after change. People need to hear from you all the time.
Yeah, I think key point is the control, and the second key point is information. So you have to communicate, you have to provide information to the customer, because if they don't know it, they may be more afraid of it. Once you deliver the information in a credible way, yeah, they have the knowledge, so they are more in charge, more in control.
Yeah, I keep the words of a cyber expert who once told me, everything has risk. It is never a question of, if you make this investment in this XYZ technology, you bring the risk down to zero. So the question is always, what is the acceptable level of risk? So if you show somebody the benefits, right, if it's all about cost and pain, then there's no level of risk that I'm willing to accept for that. But if you show me that there's some benefit to me, then there's some acceptable level of risk that I will take in order to achieve that benefit.
So the way I look at it is human beings, majority of human beings are irrational. Majority. And if you do a Myers-Briggs personality type indicator and you look at the NT polarity, it's a minority of people. So what does that mean? That means you don't necessarily use logic to get to people. And our problem is that we get so enthusiastic, we study math and science and we become like little Mr. Spocks, and then we want to sell that story logically to people. Light trucks are one of the most unsafe things to be in. And does that show up when you're on the highway? Bacon, sausage, the little things you eat in the morning in the hotels that are full of butter and all that. That's a lot more risky than any smart meter radiation. But does that stop anyone? No, because their favorite movie actors in movies are doing it, and so on. So there are things that we need to do to understand the cultural undercurrents of our society. And we need to connect to those. For instance, if a kid that is in a school is in an energy program in school, and he's or she's told, you need to save so much energy, they will come and talk to their parents. Their parents will be the #1 candidate for instrumentation of the house. Because the kid is saying, and they say, you promise you don't want the next Xbox 360 if I get you this? Yes, yes, Mom, I promise. This is the kind of negotiation that occurs in homes. We're not aliens. We haven't come from another planet. Our own families do this. So all I would suggest is, if we want to get past the hurdles, we need to resonate with the cultural undercurrents and put up a story that's compelling from their value system.
Do we have any questions from the audience at this point in time? We got more questions here. Yes.
So the question for Matt is on the last topic there. How do you sell smart appliances to people?
So another business that GE is in the process of selling.
Bring good things to life.
Yeah, so we try, and we actually put a lot of investment into developing, some pretty cool capability. It turns out that most consumers purchase an appliance when an appliance in their house fails, or when they buy a new house. So you only have a very narrow decision window. Usually they go into the store in a hurry to buy a new refrigerator or a new stove, and you know, they're driven by the bells and whistles on the device. They don't spend a lot of time, you know, DOE did us all a great service with these yellow tags, right, which is one of the ways in which, you know, we've actually improved the information to consumers, or Energy Star, which is an EPA program. The challenge is, as Irfan put it, consumers mostly make big purchase decisions on emotional basis. So, you know, unfortunately, you know, things like the through-the-door ice maker on your fridge, which uses a lot of electricity to deliver, you know, a questionable amount of benefit. I have one, I use it, but, you know, I can get the same cold water from the sink. You know, consumers see that and buy a fridge based on that, and it wipes out all of the savings from all of the smart features that we could try to put in. It turns out that, you know, in terms of the communications capability and sort of drilling down from the big 2 or 3 items in a home to get to all of the small energy-using devices, right now it's just not practical. Consumers aren't valuing the energy aspects of controlling those devices. I think where it will come is from other features like home security integration or entertainment. You know, can my Xbox in the bedroom talk to my game system in the living room? You know, my kids discovered, and this is like a great technology anecdote. Literally, like the other weekend, I come home, my daughter is under the couch on my son's Kindle. And I don't understand. And then I look up and I realize they're both playing against each other. They figured out how to get around the parental controls that don't let them go out to the internet to find other competitors. They're playing Minecraft with each other, one on the big screen and one on the little screen, right? There is suddenly a networking value that had never occurred to me to having both of these devices connected on the home Wi-Fi. If you find those value points, that's a funny anecdote, right? But, you know, if there were let's say a nutrition value to my refrigerator talking to my exercise machine in the basement, they could share energy information as a side benefit of that communication. And I think we're ultimately going to find in this Internet of Things world that there are all sorts of, you know, apps that sit on your device. You know, you see it already. There's a company that will sell you a home lock that you can remotely control from your cell phone, so you can let the babysitter in, right? Or in my case, you know, when my mom comes over to babysit and she can't figure out how to use the key lock box, you know, I can open the door for her. You know, Nest is allowing you to control your comfort level remotely, right? And if you forgot to turn off the stove when you go on vacation, hey, or turn off the thermostat, you know, to its vacation settings, all those things become possible when all those devices are networked. You know, the intelligence is already there. You have native controls on your dishwasher, on your washing machine. How many of them do you actually use? I mean, honestly, you know, I have these beautiful brand new GE appliances because we moved into a new home last year. We remodeled. You use like 3 settings on your washing machine all the time. And there's like 10 other settings. I don't know what they do. I never bothered to read the manual. I haven't bothered to learn them. But, you know, if you had a smart device that made those decisions for you based on, you know, knowing your schedule, knowing your preference, knowing your, you know, bill and what you're willing to pay for electricity, you'd probably, you know, think that was pretty cool because it gives you control. So I think that's where the smart appliance thing will ultimately go.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Long answer.
So in the second panel, Ed is going to be talking about transactive energy, I'm sure. The reason why he's going to talk about transactive energy is because he knows a few people like him know what's coming. And what's coming is really bad news for this country. And I'll tell you why. Not from a cybersecurity. I'm not so concerned about cybersecurity as I am about the supply of electricity. We are going in a direction, like as if, you know, there's a tornado over there and we're driving and we're just looking at the markers in front of us and we're headed for that tornado. What do I mean by that? You're not building centralized power generation. You're moving into a direction of distributed energy resources. The consumption of electricity is becoming more peaked as a result of using electronics as well as bringing electric vehicles on the line. What gives? You know, this is an operations research problem. It's an optimization problem. But if you take the current constructs of the way electricity is produced, transmitted, and distributed, and you put more and more of that, it's not a through street. So there has to be a fundamental change in the way we transact electricity in order to accommodate all these changes and still have a reliable and safe system. So while today electricity may be 6 to 8% of median income in most geographies in the country, that makes devices, the energy efficiency aspect of it, not important to the average American. If we continue on this path, electricity costs can double, triple in the not so far future. So unless there's a fundamental change in the way we transact, we'll have inflation in electricity. So my recommendation is, if there are smarts in a device and it doesn't cost too much money, get it. Because tomorrow it can be part of the model that Ed is going to be talking about.
Okay, we've pretty much run out of time, so I'm going to end with having just one quick lightning round.
Okay.
Each of you give me a really quick answer, and then after that, dinner is out here? Okay. So what I'd like each of you to do is tell us, what do you consider to be the most underrated or overlooked topic in the smart grid? Irfan, start with you.
I think that people are trying to wag the dog rather than wag the tail. And that's my biggest issue right now, is that they don't understand the enormity of the challenge. So the solutions that a lot of people are presenting in our industry are very naive. And as I said, this is the time for systemic thinking. I'm not saying that you have to solve the whole problem, but at least understand it in its construct. That it is a very large electromechanical system, that for the most part it is interconnected, and implications in one place are going to affect another place. And you cannot just say, okay, big IOUs, you've got the deep budget, so you can secure it, you can make it reliable and resilient. If a muni or a co-op doesn't have enough money, and you don't help them out enough, they can become the Achilles heel for the electric grid. So I'm very, very concerned that we are not looking at the problem as a system, and we're looking at it a la carte, and mostly to improve either our personal careers or the valuation of companies, rather than doing a national service. And that's where I'll leave it.
Okay, Matt, how about you?
Okay, so restate the question.
What's the most underrated or overlooked topic?
Underrated or overlooked. So I think there's a lack of awareness. So I've been mostly the optimist on this panel. We've got cyber risk, and that's real. We've got potential medical consequences.
Yeah.
And, somebody has to sell the upside here, which is consumers get more choice, new services. We get more renewables on the grid. I think there is an underrated loss of expertise that is coming. So the guys, and they're mostly men, over 50, who actually understand how the grid works, are all retiring in the next few years. Unfortunately, with them, we're going to lose a lot of unique knowledge that's hard-won. And I think we have to hurry to capture and embed that knowledge in knowledge management tools, in mobile apps that the young field force will be able to use to approximate what we have. But recognize that what makes the grid a challenge is that, because these are very long-lived assets, you may see circumstances like an outage of a transmission line that occurs once in your career, or a new power plant getting built and commissioned once in your career. And so if you don't have the knowledge that's built up over 20, 30 years, and all those people retire, as we have a big wave of folks doing, and by the way, we have a big wave of asset retirements as well. So we have this sort of generational turnover in both the infrastructure and in the knowledge base. So I guess my underrated challenge is, how do we sort of hand off the baton to the next generation without dropping it?
Okay, thank you.
Well,
Got
if
it.
we talk about potential health effects, I think most of you would agree that it's not underrated, it's probably overrated at this point. So it's really hard to come up with overlooked areas. I think the big issue is that we have to put the exposure in context, and then when we talk about radio frequency exposure, we have to consider all the potential sources, or we have to put it in all context. What are other sources? And smart meter may be just a drop in the sea, and maybe all the smart grid exposure to smart grid technologies might just be the drop in the sea compared to other uses of radio frequency communication.
Okay, well, thank you. That's all we have time for, but they're sticking around, so you can ask questions of them after this. We're at dinner and our networking time, so join me again in another applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You did 2 jobs, so you get a big bag.
Yeah. My bag's bigger, yeah.
So I think our keynote will be 7:15.
Yeah, that's what I got here.